Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the US calls on authorities in Eswatini to hold back in the use of deadly force after pro-democracy protesters say that several people have been killed in a crackdown on rallies. Also, turning the page on peacebuilding. As DR Congo marks its 61st independence anniversary, I speak to a researcher who believes the country's hopes for a more stable future could be shaped by communities who've already successfully flipped the script on peacebuilding. We hear more about the island of Ivory. And dry dams and a breakdown at a thermal power plant have led to months of electricity blackouts in Ivory Coast. The shortage has meant many Ivorians have had to put plans on hold as they deal with the uncertainty of power rationing. But first, pro-democracy demonstrators in Eswatini claim that at least 8 people have been killed in clashes with the police. Unrest escalated this week as protesters rallied to demand political reform in Africa's last absolute monarchy. Nicolas Chemin with more.
The usually stable kingdom of Eswatini has been rocked by protests in recent days. Shops have been looted and the government has imposed a dusk-to-dawn curfew. Activists said several people were killed, but the authorities have yet to confirm this. Demonstrators say they want democratic reforms in Africa's last absolute monarchy, which was called Swaziland until 3 years ago.
You get me? Our government is not being fair. It's just a one-man's land. No autonomous.
Us as young people of the land, we don't want the king to be part of the government. And if we want to be part of the government, he must first be a citizen like the rest of us and go to work like every one of us.
Some roads were blocked and many are worried about the general situation.
I've been running for the past 6 kilometers, trying to get hold of my kid. Like, it's a bad situation. You can't even pass through the gates. It's so bad. It's really so bad, and you can't even drive.
The Prime Minister denied reports that King Swati III had fled to South Africa, and he made an unusual suggestion to protesters.
Once again request all aggrieved Maswati to use alternative channels to express their grievances. Government has opened an email address where Maswati can continue to direct their concerns and petitions.
King Swati has 15 wives and has been in power for 35 years. In his kingdom, political parties are banned, and he's repeatedly been accused of using state money to fund his lavish lifestyle.
Ethiopia says that federal troops have left the capital of the northern region of Tigray after months of fighting. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed claims the withdrawal from Mekele was because the city is no longer the centre of the conflict. Now, the statement comes just days after local TPLF forces retook the city. Tigrayan forces claim that government troops were forced out and that Eritrean soldiers backing federal troops were still in the region. The conflict, which began last November, has led to mass displacement, warnings of famine, and reports of brutal mass killings and abuse of civilians. Nigerian separatists are demanding a fair hearing for their arrested leader. This week, authorities said that Nnamdi Kanu was detained and brought back to the country, having skipped bail in 2017 and headed overseas. The founder of the Indigenous People of Biafra, or IPOB, faces terror and treason charges. The group wants a separate homeland for the Igbo people of the southeast. A unilateral declaration of Biafran independence in 1967 sparked over 2 years of war, in which more than 1 million people died. Now, June 30th is DR Congo's 61st anniversary of independence from Belgian colonial rule. The journey since has not been easy. The country's seen decades of conflict, particularly in the east. Combatants from countries like Burundi, Rwanda and Uganda have regularly crossed over to stage operations, and various militant groups terrorize local communities. Just this week, the Islamic State claimed its first suicide attack in the country in Beni, North Kivu, over the weekend. Now, peace and the development that it could foster is a priority for many Congolese. So with me today is a researcher who says the country could look within for a new template for peace building. Séverine Autesserre, thank you so much for speaking to me today. Now, you've recently released a book, The Front Lines of Peace, and you start off with a focus on one particular Congolese community. So tell us why, for you, is Ivory, the island of Ivory, so important in global conversations about tackling armed conflict?
Well, thank you so much, Georgia, for having me. And thank you for speaking about Ivory, which is absolutely fascinating because it's an island of peace in Congo. You were saying that one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II has raged around Ivory for the past 25 years. 1 million people have died. Hundreds continue to die every day because they do that despite the presence of one of the largest and most expensive peacekeeping missions in the world. But for the past 20 years, Ivory itself has avoided mass violence. And the peace there is so interesting because Ivory contains all of the same preconditions that have led to generalized fighting in other parts of Congo, like ethnic tensions or mineral resources. And when you speak with people in Ivory, you realize that it's not the state, the police, or the army who manage to control tensions, and it's not foreign peacekeepers either, but it is the members of the community themselves. And so the story of Ivory shows us that local community resources can sometimes build peace better than the usual elite agreements between government and rebel leaders or the usual foreign interventions.
However, so you're really kind of focusing on the importance that grassroots work can play in terms of changing the template of peace building that's generally employed. But surely that must itself have certain limitations and fragility.
It does have some limitations and fragilities. So I'm not saying let's get rid of any interactions with governments and with rebel leaders and let's focus everything at the grassroots. But it's not fragile in the sense that if you look at Ivory, they have been peaceful again for 20 years. And one of my other favorite examples is Somaliland, where they have had peace over a very large territory and a quasi-state for 20 years as well.
So what specifically are some of the elements that you have identified in Ivory that you think could be transplanted into other situations?
So what I found is that it turns out that elections don't build peace. Democracy itself, that may not be the golden ticket, at least not in the short term. What I found is that contrary to what most politicians preach, building peace doesn't require billions in aid or massive international interventions. Instead, it often involves giving power to ordinary citizens. So ultimately, if you look at examples of peace buildings that have been successful over the past few years, whether in Congo, in other parts of Africa, or in other continents, they have all involved innovative grassroots initiatives that were led by local people. Sometimes they were supported by foreigners. And all the time, these people were using methods that were shunned by the international elite.
Now, we don't have much time. You did touch upon there another one of the communities or countries that you focus on in your book. It's a book that highlights a number of communities around the world, but one other that's in Africa is Somaliland. Very quickly, give us a sense about why Somaliland for you also stands out as a success story when it comes to peace building.
Well, there is a fascinating contrast between, on the one hand, you have Somalia, that is extremely violent, has some of the highest rankings in some of the least desirable categories, like most corrupt country. And on the other hand, you have this autonomous region in the north of Somalia that is called Somaliland, and that has experienced very little violence in the past 20 years, very little terrorism, has a well-functioning state, decent public services like electricity and water, and even some form of functioning democracy. They just had local elections. And of course, there are many reasons for the difference, but the key one is that Somaliland benefited from sustained grassroots peace-building initiatives that were led by insiders, by Somalilanders themselves, while the usual top-down approach to peace, with its focus on governments, on leaders, and on foreign peacekeepers, has prevailed in the rest of Somalia.
Thank you so much for giving us some of your insights. Séverine Autesserre there. Now, finally, a lack of rain has led to a lack of electricity in Ivory Coast. The country struggled with power cuts since April because two major hydroelectric dams in the southeast have almost run dry. Authorities are waiting eagerly for the rainy season to do its work. In the meantime, though, many Ivorians are finding it tough going. Our correspondents report.
A fully equipped studio with no recording planned until further notice.
Et comme vous constatez, blackout, pas d'électricité.
Vianney and his team had planned on launching their TV channel at this site, right in the heart of Abidjan, but the recent electricity shortage in the city has put their project on hold. For about 2 months, Ivorians have been subjected to electricity rationing, power cuts imposed to make up for an energy deficit of up to 10%. And businesses have not been spared either. According to the head of the Ivorian Employers Association, some industries, such as steelmaking, have already lost up to 70% of their revenue because of the crisis.
Les professionnels de l'énergie ont vu venir les choses depuis déjà 4-5 mois. Je pense qu'il aurait fallu le dire aux opérateurs beaucoup plus tôt.
The shortage was partly caused by damage to the Azido thermal power plant, but the slow start to the rainy season exacerbated problems. About 150 kilometers east of Abidjan, the Ayame dams are no longer running at full capacity.
Là, on voit un peu le gap. À cette période de l'année, nous sommes autour de la côte 88. Aujourd'hui, vous voyez qu'il y a un gap d'environ 5 mètres. Aujourd'hui, tous les barrages hydroélectriques de Côte d'Ivoire ont leurs lacs qui sont vraiment à sec.
The Ivorian Electricity Company says it hopes to resolve the crisis over the coming months. The shortage has also sparked questions about how global warming might affect the long-term viability of Ivory Coast's heavy reliance on hydroelectricity.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.